Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Shuchi Rana.
Welcome back, everybody. Our next fireside chat will help us find an answer to a very important question, which is not what is the meaning of life, but an equally important one, what the heck does it even mean to do AI? So please put your hands together in welcoming Deborah Leff, global leader and industry CTO for data science and AI, IBM, and Chris Chapeau, SVP of data and analytics at Gap.
Well, I feel like there's enough of you. You can come sit with us up here.
Love our own fireside chat.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deborah Leff, and I'm with IBM. I'm an industry CTO for retail and consumer goods. So it's my job to travel around the world and meet with companies in those industries that are really trying to understand what are the best ways for them to take these emerging technologies and actually apply them to their business and be able to accelerate growth or differentiation or customer experience with them. And I'm joined here today with Chris from Gap. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Chapeau. I lead our data and analytics team at Gap Inc., which is responsible for bringing data science, AI, analytics, even consumer insights to every aspect of our business, from how we design our product to how we ship our products, how we assort and manage our stores, to how we create experiences in our websites and in stores.
Excellent. Well, I've been a Gap customer for years. All my kids have grown up in Gap.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Now it's Athleta and Banana Republic.
Yes.
So we've been longtime family supporters. So let's start with what the heck does it mean to do this AI thing, right? I mean, It means so many things to different people. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, it's funny. When we were talking about this beforehand, I'd say there's what I would call a business definition of it, and then a data science definition. And I'll start with the business definition. And for me, when I think about what it means to quote unquote do AI, it's creating computers or systems that actually mimic humans and actually can solve problems like people can. But they maybe do it at a faster scale, cheaper, hopefully more effectively at times. But it really is just kind of, I would say, creating that sort of environment for that.
When we first started with Watson, one of the very first use cases was in healthcare. And one of the examples was if you're an oncologist treating cancer patients, the amount of research you would need to read on a weekly basis just to stay current with what's happening with trials is about 40 hours a week. So when you think about having computers act like humans, this ability for them to just ingest this incredible corpus of data to be able to support the human, I think that's what I think when I think about AI. It's how we can empower a computer to see things that we can't otherwise see or would just take us a painstakingly long time to figure it out. That really accelerates that.
Definitely.
But I'm curious about that data science angle.
The angle, well, it's funny because if you were to, because I'm a data scientist, I would say by training, and when I think about the type of tools and I would say the breadth of algorithms out there, that's how a data scientist would think about AI, which would be things like natural language processing, machine learning, predictive analytics. And you get to get so specialized that sometimes you kind of lose the forest for the trees, in my opinion, which is really around how do we leverage this new capability, which, by the way, isn't super new, to actually solve problems in a meaningful way.
It is actually not new, right? I have a lot of conversations with organizations that want to have a discussion around we need to talk about AI. Can we have it's boardroom level now? Because if they're not adopting it, there's the fear, and one of our speakers, John, this morning was talking about the fact that if your competitors are applying AI and they're finding insights that allow them to accelerate, they're going to peel away really, really quickly. And it used to be that large companies had this inherent advantage over small companies, whether it was their size, their geographic presence. But now the world has changed, and it's the fast companies that can outperform the slow companies regardless of their size. And it's no-name brands that can activate with a Shopify on Instagram. I mean, to be in business and actually start chipping away at market share of giants, industry leaders and giants, it's more enabled today than it has been before. And so data science has been around since like the mid-1950s. It just didn't have the cool, hip names that it does now, the data scientists, the AI practitioners, machine learning engineers. And if you're talking to VCs, you're talking AI. If you're talking internally about a project, you're talking machine learning. But if you're talking with the data scientist, you're talking regression analysis.
Right.
It's really just the spin of it. But it is not new. And I think that the fact that the data scientists are interpreting it differently than the business leaders is actually a really important point.
Right.
Because it's bringing those two things together that is critical for so many AI projects.
And when you think about, just building on that, that point, when we think about AI projects, we actually never use the word AI. That may be the tool we use. We talk about what are the problems we need to solve. To your point, how do we get faster, better, smarter at that? And I'll give you one example of something that we're doing today at Gap to leverage these techniques. So when we think about a lot of the fashion retailers of the future, of today, time between when you make a decision to design a product and when it gets in a store is, for folks like Gap Inc., has been historically quite long. When I've been the Gap about 3 years, but it used to be 56 weeks between when you design a product and when it's in a customer's hand. And the more the decisions you need to make on things like, well, what color, what's the size, what's the trend going to be, the more you can get confidence in those, but also shrink that 56 weeks down, the better off you're going to be. So we're doing some examples of things where we're beginning to put product in store, get initial reads of product, and then using data science and AI, begin to understand, well, who are the customers that's going to sell more for? How do we assort our stores better, the broad set of stores? And how do we, quite frankly, shrink that time down between when we're making the decision of buying a ton of product and when it actually hits the store?
So you actually touched on something really important, and that is the most successful projects start at the end.
Right.
And it's really not, I want to create a model that does this. It's, I want to drive this outcome.
Correct.
Right? We can do a better job going to market if we could predict what customers are likely to purchase this style in this size, and then have that inform the decision tree coming backwards so that you're optimizing those processes.
Right.
And I'd say pretty much all of the projects that we're involved in, we always ask, what's the outcome you're trying to drive? How will you measure it? Like, how will you actually know if you succeeded? Because if you understand that measurement criteria, you understand where that model's going to go, right? Some models create, the output is going to be on a dashboard, and a decision maker is going to take that information and make a decision. But other models are going to live in a process.
Right.
They're going to be part of a website. They're going to be part of a mobile app. They're going to inform a decision with streaming data real time. But depending on where it's going, it's going to have a huge impact on the way the model is built. Because a model that needs to handle streaming data for real-time decisioning is so different than a model that's going to be, the output might appear in a spreadsheet. That could be a highly computational, complex model that actually can't run real time. And so by understanding where it's going, you design it from that endpoint backwards, and you have a much greater chance of being successful.
I'd love to build on that as well, I think. So starting with the end state in mind and making sure we design for that's super important. Another thing I found to be really important, particularly when we think about AI, is actually starting simple on the solution. Because oftentimes people will want to, imagine a world where we're doing this amazing, fancy unicorn sprinkling pixie dust sort of world. But the reality is, start simple and you can actually prove your way into the complexity. So an example of this where I've talked with a lot of, even internally with our teams, around personalizing our websites or personalizing our email streams. When I first started talking to some of our marketing teams around this, they said, oh, well, I've heard that Starbucks has an app where they personalize to a segment of 12 million people. They have 12 million segments, so it's almost like one-to-one personalization.
Yeah.
They're like, we want that. And I say, as I work with teams, like, well, we're not ready for that, because do you have the content for it? Do you have the strategies for it? And so when we start pretty simple and then we add the complexity, that's where we've actually begun to not only, I would say, show value quicker, but also help particularly our businesses who aren't really versed in data to understand the process, feel comfortable with it.
So what comes to mind when you're saying that is, I mean, have you guys seen that where an executive's like, hey, this person has this, we need something like that too? Yeah. And like the question then is, so if you also had 12 million segments, would that help you? Would that actually deliver value? And I do a lot of speaking for IBM, and one of the things that I talk about is that if you actually look at the disruptive companies, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the Amazon, Apple, what's amazing about what they've done is that they've come into established markets and they've rethought the customer experience. And things we didn't know we needed, like, you know, I live in New York City, I take taxis all of the time. I didn't know that it wasn't good enough. I didn't know that I actually would like a clean taxi that smells nice, that has power and water. Who knew?
It doesn't get lost.
Who knew I needed that? But now, the whole way they've assembled is about it's really rethinking the customer experience. Right. So when you come at an AI project, I always say, if you can answer the question, what are you trying to do for your customer? How are you trying to make the world a better place for them? Whether it's more fashionable and more enjoyable, or it's safer, or if it's just more convenient. But always think in terms of how are we trying to make the world a better place? Because those are the most successful projects. They have a mission, if you will, as opposed to just, we want to do this. And then when you get into the thick of a project, like trying to create that many million segmentations, and it gets hard, they die and they fail. And I think CIO Dive magazine says that only 13% of data science projects actually make it into production. 13%. I mean, that's a staggering number. Do you think that number's true? Does that ring true for you?
It rings true for me, 1 out of every 10, historically. And I think, where I mean, it goes back to what we just talked about, where I see a lot of them failing is they're starting from the technology first, trying to get super complex. And I'd say the third thing, maybe to add on to it, is they don't always have the right people as part of the core team when you're trying to bring that project to life. So example of this, like when I'm trying to get our teams, again, it's about creating conditions for success. One of those conditions is I try to make sure I've got someone, if it is a customer-facing experience, I have a CI person part of that team. Making sure we actually have UX and design, and UX not being just visual design, but experience design folks as part of that team that you're trying to stand up to bring a solution to life, particularly at the beginning, because as I said, it's not necessarily about the fanciness of the model or sophistication at the beginning. It's around the thing that actually, I would say drives the most value, which is really around creating, in many things, just a better experience for customers.
Forrester says we're 5 years into the age of the customer. Yeah. And given how these digital leaders have set the bar on customer experience, companies actually really no longer compete against the closest competitor.
Correct.
Right? So one retailer isn't necessarily competing against the next retailer. You're actually competing against the best customer experience someone else has provided to you. So if I can call up a ride-sharing service on my app in just a few moments, I kind of want the same level of experience when I call my bank, or I need to file an insurance claim, or I place an order for something online. And that has really changed the rules for so many, because the customers, especially the millennials, which are now our largest buying group, the trends that we see in millennials is that they're not a very loyal purchaser. And so therefore you're competing on customer experience very much.
Right.
But that leads me to wondering, okay, so we've all heard the hype cycle, and marketing has now gotten a hold of this AI and like really convinced us that everyone needs to be thinking about how to be applying data science and AI in order to strengthen our businesses. If we all know that, why do you think it's not more mainstream?
Well, I think but there's probably many reasons, but maybe one of the biggest ones is goes back to what we've heard multiple times over the last couple of days is sometimes people think of this as all I need to do is tell people or throw money at a problem or put a technology in and success comes out the end. And you even shared the stat from the CIO magazine, that just doesn't happen. And so my big sense is part of the reason we're not doing it is, broadly speaking, is we don't have the right leadership support to make sure we create the conditions for AI success. A lot of startups do that because by definition they kind of have to because they're going to run out of money or they're not going to get the investment. And so,
Or they don't have the legacy
have the legacy
systems that are holding them back.
right. But when I think of a company like mine, which is 50 years old this summer, which is amazing, it has a lot of legacy, and both from a brand and kind of even defining how specialty retail came to life. But changing how we work is pretty challenging. So I've had the opportunity to spend time with our board and with our senior leaders, and I think the big challenge that we face, just to be clear, is, as I mentioned, my scope is everything from design of product all the way to shipping and even people analytics, is where do we start? Where do we focus so that we can actually drive change in the organization using AI, data science, as opposed to saying we have to do everything all at once. I think that's the biggest problem that most big companies face is the focus component. It's not the technology.
So one of the things that's really near and dear to IBM's heart, as well as my own personal heart, is that Harvard Business Review came out with an article about a year and a half ago. And this is around the time where a lot of press about how AI is going to disintermediate a lot of jobs and going to take away a lot of jobs. And what the article said was that AI is not going to replace managers, but managers that use AI is going to replace those that don't. And so I think one of the biggest opportunities for all of us today is to figure out how we educate the business leaders across the organization. Because it used to be, it was okay, right? Data science has been around since the mid-1950s. We've had statisticians and quants and research analysts embedded in operations all across organizations. The difference is they were like in a basement, no windowless room with a data set and a terminal. And they did their work on their own. Now, with the explosion of data and the elasticity around cloud computing and all of the power that brings to what machines can do for us, it has stepped into the forefront. But before, it wasn't, a leader didn't need to necessarily know what the data scientist was doing. Now that data science is so stepped into the forefront, it's actually really important that business leaders understand these concepts, right? They understand, listen, I don't know about you, but if I'm with a business leader, head of, P&L owner, and someone mentions neural networks or unsupervised learning, they're like immediately glossed over. They don't even want to know from this. But the concepts behind what it means for them, what it means that it can do, allows them to start imagining what are the things they wished they could predict in their job role that would actually make them more successful. And we're starting to see that awakening of business leaders wanting to understand how machine learning works, what does AI really mean for them, and how they can leverage it successfully. And those leaders are going to be the most in demand, because once they do it in their organization, they're going to be ignited in terms of the things they can do for other organizations. I think that's so important that, whether it's a Coursera course, whether it's YouTube videos, whether it's an IBM conference, if you want to know anything about that, I'm happy to tell you. But really making sure there are resources for executives is so critical.
And I think that's super important. That starts from the top, if you will. But also I believe that there's the build from the masses as well, particularly for larger companies. And so I get inspired by some of the work that LinkedIn has done. I talked about yesterday, Airbnb has done around data universities and organizations, where it's not just about how do we train data scientists to be great data scientists, but if I'm a marketer, how do what should I know about AI? Like what should I know about, to your point, how I apply it? And then I'd say the third piece, and this is something, there's an article that's probably about 5 years old now called Analyzing the Analyzers, which is kind of a fun article. It's
Shrinking the Shrinks?
Shrinking the Shrinks. Well, actually, it's funny because it's an article by data scientists about data scientists. And they did some research, and they began to classify data scientists into different categories, ones which are traditionally like the data researchers. So these are the people, to your point, we might have historically thought of the back of the house. There's the data creatives, the people who tell the stories of the data. There's the, I would say the data algorithmic folks, I forgot the exact name, but the ones who are more, I guess, software engineers.
Modeling, spending time modeling.
Spending time modeling. And then the last one, which I think is super important, which is they call the data business person or the data entrepreneur, which is someone who truly has the understanding of the methods, but also has the passion to drive business. And those are the ones, if you can get enough of those in your organization, that to me is how you can begin to make it real, because you may have the buy-in from the execs, but if you can't deliver it, it's a recipe for disaster.
So you actually touched on something really important to mention. So you can imagine we see a lot of projects across IBM and across all of our clients, across all industries around the world. And one of the things that we've really been investing in is trying to understand, why aren't more of these projects successful? What actually holds companies back? And what you just said is actually one of the observations. So it's the second one. The first one, because it's the most important, is data. Yeah. Data is this double-edged sword. It's what makes all of these analytics and capabilities possible, but yet, practically speaking, in organizations, they're highly siloed. Right. They have different owners, and I might even say fiefdoms, if you will, because I've had data scientists look me in the face and say, we could do that project, but we can't get access to the data. And I'm like, and your management's allowing that to go on? Like, you need access to that data. It's different formats. Right. It's structured, it's unstructured, it's video files, it's images, it's different types of data. It lives in different places. It has different security and privacy requirements. And so just every data project starts with, okay, well, we're going to need like a few months to actually get the data together and get it ready. And that really just drags projects down. And so we've been investing in, okay, what can you do about that? The second one is collaboration. And when the data scientist was an individual in a room working behind their terminal, that was very different. And you really didn't quite acutely feel the different skill sets that you just mentioned. But now that it's a team sport and the importance of that work is now being embedded into the fabric of the company, the ability to collaborate with anyone in that continuum, people that understand the data engineers, the data stewards, people that understand the data science or analytics or BI specialists, all the way up to the DevOps and to engineering, because those models are going to go live in an application. This is a big place that holds companies back because they're not used to collaborating in this way. And we were talking the other day about, you can have a data science team that works just on data science. And I've seen this in other companies, not yours, but in other companies where I'll be like, okay, so where are we getting the data? And they're like, oh no, we have a department for that. We put in a ticket, they send it over. And we're like, okay. They need to be at the table with us. And when you're done, what are we going to do with the insights? Oh, we're going to put them in Excel and we're going to just flip them over the wall. I'm like, okay, those people need to be here too. That's not the way it should work. You're not this siloed independent organization. We need that collaboration across, because when they take those insights and they flip them over the wall, now you're asking an engineer to rewrite a data science model, machine learning model created by a data scientist. How's that work out usually?
Well, it doesn't work well. In fact, we were just sharing earlier this week where we've had a project which one of our early data science projects was creating what we call size profiles, which is for this jacket, like what's the range of sizes and distribution that we need to build. And a data scientist years ago, probably 4 years ago, created the algorithm. It was tuned. It was probably one of the best that we've ever seen coming out of tools, because the team went and shared it at conferences, right? So then handed it to an engineer, got recoded in Java, implemented, and literally 2 weeks ago, we realized that has been broken for 3.5 years. And so to the point we're just making is we're actually
sad.
It's very sad. And honestly, it's...
And why was it broken?
It's broken because nobody owned it. We didn't have the data science team to be able to continually iterate on the models, think of it as an asset, and actually have what we call data ops or data operation, where someone's looking at that and making sure it's working well. And so we're starting to bring those ways of working to life, but it's hard because you can't just do it all overnight. Just like a DevOps journey would be for software engineering. You need to go to the same journey for data science and analytics.
Well, and that's why bringing those, data engineers and DevOps have been working for teams for a long time. Bringing those wireframes for how you work as a team with data science is so important as well. Another thing that holds companies back, that they're not able to effectively work across. And I think in that case, you said something in the data pipeline just went wrong and the engineering couldn't spot it and you didn't know for 3 years. Oh God, I feel like an AI angel dies when I hear a story like that. Like it's just so sad. It's the best intention, but it just, in the execution, it just didn't make it.
Didn't make it.
That's really sad. All right, so any advice? So if our friends here today were going to go out and participate in or lead an AI project, what would be your guidance to them?
I'd say 3 things. First, pick a small project to get started. Don't try to boil the ocean. Pick something that's is contained enough to where you can show demonstrable progress in, let's say, a 2-month period of time. 2, make sure, as we just talked about, you have the right team you identify that's collaborative and cross-functional to solve this problem. And 3rd, I would highly recommend this, is leverage third parties and folks like IBM and others to help accelerate your journey at the beginning, because many of the problems we're solving are not unique. They may be unique to us as a company, but are not unique in the industry. So learn from others and liberally, I don't want to use the word steal, but share, learn from others and use best practices.
Well, I think there's such an open community around data science and AI that I think that that's excellent advice. I would say that from working with companies like Gap and others, what's really interesting is when you go down this journey, you don't always know that you actually have the right tooling and the right stack internally. And there are times where, because the business doesn't always understand exactly what's happening in data science is, they're using their open source tools, they're doing things their way, and sometimes they're actually missing key things in that stack and they don't know it. And it means that their projects are going really slowly. You know, I sometimes use the analogy, I put 2 cars up on a screen and I'm like, one's got a 240 horsepower engine and one's got a 640 horsepower engine. Which is which? And they're like, I don't know. Exactly. Yeah. Like, you have to make sure that you take a look at the end-to-end life cycle of these projects to make sure that you're leveraging the tools and the technologies that actually make them go faster. And the thing about AI is that it's not additive. We cannot take the AI cherry and drop it upon existing systems. There's no AI fairy dust that we just sprinkle around the organization.
You don't have it? I thought you did.
Well, we have other things, but no. And they really require just different ways of thinking. They need all of these ecosystems underneath them. You cannot walk into a store and take, I'll have 7 AIs and a cup of coffee to go, please. They're a bigger effort. And not just starting with the ad, but setting that expectation with the business that it's not magic, so that they understand what are all of the components that are going to go into it, where do you need their guidance and their check-ins to make sure that you stay on track, and they also have the patience to let these technologies get developed properly and get implemented, because they take time, and having the business stand there and toe tap of okay, we need to get this done already is not helpful. So just setting that expectation is really important. All right, that's the time we have. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much, and enjoyed spending time with you too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the insightful conversation, Deborah and Chris. Our next conversation is about creating a framework for AI decision-making. Please welcome Ram Papatla, Head of Experiences, Booking.com, and Rachel Payne, CEO, FEM, Inc.
Thank you for having me. All right.
Ram, it's so exciting to talk to you today about travel. That is a topic that's very easily exciting.
Yeah.
In fact, earlier in my career, I was on the early launch team of Hotwire.com.
Oh, cool.
So this is an area of great interest to me.
Awesome.
Let's talk about your role. You're Vice President of Global Experiences.
Yep.
And it would be wonderful to understand, how do you think about the customer journey and the user experience for many different types of users? You know, first, tell me about your role, and then I'd like to walk through a little bit about how you think about personalization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run something called Booking Experiences, which is everything other than hotels. Which is all about thinking about the assortment for travel. So making sure that when people go to a destination, they can get the right transportation, they can experience the museums or the attractions in the city, or maybe even get a table that they can book through OpenTable, which is our sister company, in terms of really reducing the friction. So we're on a long journey to make sure that we can actually recommend some interesting assortment and interesting next things to do for our customers when they're actually in destination. So which is actually pretty cool. Yeah.
Wonderful. And you're interacting with many different customers on different platforms, maybe on their mobile device. they could be logged in, or maybe you've never seen them before, or perhaps they're a repeat customer.
Yeah.
How do you think about each one? And what techniques, specifically machine learning techniques and others, are you utilizing in order to optimize the experience for every type of user? And related to that would be, what kinds of data do you rely on in order to do that effectively?
Yeah, it's a good question. We can talk for a couple hours on this, but I'll try to hit the sort of the main points. I think when you look at Booking.com, the way we think about machine learning and AI is sort of the core of how we work. So to give you the scale, we've used supervised learning for many years, a couple decades, and at this point we probably have 500 machine learning models running live in production. And we can do things like, hey, if a customer forgets to add their kids, which is a very interesting use case that happens all the time. You're in a rush to book a room, and you don't think about your children during that booking process. We have learned so much about that pattern that we can kind of reinforce that message back to our customers that it looks like you forgot your kids at different parts of the journey.
Hopefully not on the journey.
Not on the journey, that'll be too late. But yeah, during the journey process of the actual booking. So that's just one example. Another example is, we use Markov chains to really figure out what is the sort of destination recommendation. And there are close to 2.5 billion parameters that we use in this technique to make sure that we are very accurate about how to represent your next trip. And the reason this is important and the bias for data and the bias for thinking about consumer thinking is much more deeper at a booking is travel happens only once. You probably may go to a destination only once, right? It's not like buying a commodity box of cereal or just buying diapers for your kids, right? And it's okay if it's substitutable. There is only one probably museum in the world that you want to go to. It can't be substitutable. You probably will go to Amsterdam only 1 or 2 times in your life. So we have to really make sure that consumers get the best value out of it. So we're extremely careful about thinking about recommendations, thinking about how we use data. So that's how I think about it from a broad framework.
So a year ago, my AI venture Prisma was acquired by Nielsen, and we focused a lot on search, discovery, but really personalization. And this is for digital platforms for streaming media. So to your point, we're relying on a very different set of data, and the stakes maybe aren't as high as in online travel. And when you think about the experience, for you, you're talking about everything from the user journey all the way down to the actual travel experience. And there are so many ways in which you can provide value to the user in advance of their trip, perhaps during the booking window, also throughout the trip. How are you ensuring that you're collecting the right kinds of data, and what are the feedback loops that you've been implementing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. So I think, as I mentioned, we've been pretty focused on using data as an input to really figure out sort of how to progress during the consumer journey. But over the last few years, we've started launching a whole bunch of experiences that are not just hotels or homes or apartments. It is also about what you do in a city, the sort of the restaurant you go visit, or the going up to the Eiffel Tower or going up to the Shard in London. And then we realized that some of those things are also an interesting decision point. Not everybody can decide to book the tickets to the Shard, 45 days before, right? You probably will book your room or your flight and 45 days before, but you may like, what, I'm going to put that decision about going up the tower when I go to London, right? So we're listening to those signals to think about that zero moment of truth. When do consumers actually make that decision? What sort of data is required for us to really understand that? What we felt in some of the new products that we're launching is we don't have the sort of the moat of data that we had. So we're really relying on the activity of the user to see that are they responding to a certain search query? Are they actually responding to how we change the user experience? Are they responding to the way we think about the email, the time of the email? And we're using that to learn almost near real time, which has been a very, very fascinating journey for us.
So we talk a lot about context.
Yes.
What is that moment where they make the decision, and how do you balance these trade-offs between experimentation that allows you to continually refine the experience and really optimize for every user versus deploying at scale? There's infrastructure costs. You don't want to increase latency. There's all these trade-offs. How do you think through that and prioritize it when you're trying to make these decisions about what's best for the user?
Yeah, I think one thing that we made sure is, the core business is actually highly predictable. So, when we think about experimentation tooling, and we've written a lot about it, you can actually Google us, you can see our tooling and how the work we've done there. Or when we think about how we deploy machine learning models or the consumer journey or how our apps respond, we're very consistent about it because people don't want us to change the UX overnight. We need to make sure that, we're earning the trust of our customers. So that is fairly consistent. I think where we have a little bit more flexibility is to say that when the booking is done, when they make their trip destination, certain, then we can start to play around. We can start to tell them, oh, in Amsterdam, by the way, you can actually take a ground transport, or you can take a private car and driver through one of our other companies called Booking Go. Or maybe you can go up to this boat ride that usually sells out because it's very unique, and the boat operator gives you an interesting story that usually is not available in the generic boat rides. Right? Those are the things we can start to test. We've also seen that the context of the user, whether the price affinity of the user, the property type they're staying in, how long they're staying for. So families of 2 children staying for 3 days versus 8 days is a night and day difference. People that are staying for 8 days usually go out for day trips, or they are very indecisive of making a decision about booking anything for the first couple of days. Or people that are staying only for 2 days want to book everything, get through the city as fast as possible. So I think it's almost impossible to generalize, is what we've learned, and I think the journey is really long to really get a sense of what these cohorts of users are.
So when you think about the attributes of the experience, so you have different types of experiences, they each have different features,
Yep.
And you have to weigh what attributes are most important for which type of user at what moment in that context. What have you found? What are some of the insights that you found about that? Maybe you have a solo traveler,
Yep.
maybe you have travelers with kids, and you know that each property has different attributes. How do you prioritize and rank which ones matter most to that user? Maybe you've seen them before, maybe you haven't. How do you think through that process, and what are some of the techniques you're using?
Yeah, I think we always start with the supply side first to make sure that we are very authentic about what the supply composition is. So we want to be very clear about what the supply is. Is it a tower? Is it a helicopter ride? Is it the Napa Valley train? Or is it something else that's interesting? And then we try to figure out what are the top 4 attributes that help make the consumer the right decision. And that takes time to build those attributes. The framework is sort of called supply liquidity in the industry. So we use a supply liquidity framework to make sure that we are constantly learning about those attributes. And then we use those attributes to really figure out, do we put them in search? Do we put them in recommendation? And how do users respond to it? So for example, families with children may want to go to a rooftop bar that's actually friendly for families, right? And we don't want to remove the rooftop bars completely, assuming that they're a family and they will never go to a rooftop bar. So it's things like that, because travel again is about that serendipity. It's about that moment of you see a big building and you're like, oh, what is it? Let me go in there. And then we want to tell them, great, go in there, put your phone away, and by the way, you can actually book a ticket right now and use your phone to get in. So we're learning that context as well, and the movement of our travelers across the town in terms of the times of the day, in terms of how they come into the city, what mode of transport do they take. All of these are amazing inputs for us to sort of enrich the user's journey.
So you mentioned something in there about the types of data you're collecting, but how do you make sure you don't have bias?
Ooh.
This is a big topic for those of you who've been at the diversity panels and the breakfast, and of course there's a reception this afternoon. Bias in the data and, bias in the algorithms. How do you make sure you're on the lookout to avoid that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. We take it very seriously. Over the last few months, we've actually started. So let's step back for a second. Bias is all about there's some imbalance in some of the attributes, right? Something else is off or higher or lower.
Or missing.
Yeah, or missing. And then, you use that as the input set, and then out comes out different sets of results, and out comes out, recommendations that you never intended to serve to your customers. So we've been spending a lot of time to make sure that how do we normalize that sample set so it's not imbalanced. So one of the techniques that we've recently used is something called inverse propensity weighting, where we're trying to really normalize essentially all of the sample sets, so we can have a control group and a test group, and then we can then use that to start running further tests for our experiments. And it has actually worked out pretty well for us. And we're also having a lot of discussion with the academia to figure out how deep can we go in this area to make sure that we're learning a lot about some of the techniques that are there to really remove the bias part. So to me, it starts with the input. As long as you can, regulate the input or make sure the input is, cleaned up, you should be okay along the journey.
And of course, with the feedback loops, you're also making sure that you're testing some of this.
Absolutely, yeah.
Have you published any of this yet then with these partners? It'd be great to share that with the crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. There is one paper that we'll try to put as a link maybe to this conference, but it's from the KDD conference, so KDD, which is a big machine learning symposium. We've actually published a paper called 150 Techniques at Booking.com. So that's a lot for you to consume on your weekend reading, but I would highly encourage you to read that.
Or on
document.
your next flight that you booked on Booking.com.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, so thank you for the plug. Yeah, but yeah, that's a really cool paper, and we've also summarized the paper as well. So there's both a shorter version plus the long form version of that over the last 15 years of the things that we have done.
So in your business, when you think about how you're optimizing for the user experience, what are some of the key metrics that you're using to make sure that you're achieving your goals?
Yeah.
And I have a secondary question here too, but I'll start there.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the cool things about Booking.com is we on the way we work is obviously very experiment and data driven and very much sort of conversion focused or outcome focused. But what's interesting is the way we build products is very much input focused. So we're constantly thinking about what inputs make up the output. So starting with the supply, is the catalog correct? Is it complete? Is it accurate? Is the right weightage? What happens to the user? Are the user coming in which channel? What's their performance? What's their dwell time? When they do a search result, are they spending a lot of time scrolling down? Are they clicking the first link and going ahead and going to the next page? So it's a collection of many metrics where really we don't look at conversion from that perspective. We're looking at really the sort of the health of the user, health of the supply, and sort of following that across the way. Because we felt like it's better to know that in more detail because otherwise we'll just have to accept consequences, right? When you only look at conversion, it only goes up or down.
Right.
It's too late to do anything. So we thought we should have a lot more control of the inputs that we can control and we can tune. So we've been heavily focused on that.
That makes a lot of sense. I saw many companies fall into the trap, at least in my business, around relying too much on the click. And because it's easy to measure and it's ubiquitous and everyone knows what a click is, but it didn't necessarily lead to a better experience, didn't lead to more engagement. And so a big part of our challenge was to develop new metrics that really explain what engagement is all about and how do you measure it in a more meaningful way over time. So when you think about the lifetime value of your user and how you're building that relationship, over time, how are you seeing that evolve? So which metrics are important early on versus later in the stage of the relationship?
Yeah, so we have a concept called customer equity, which is really a reflection of lifetime value. But in equity, you also have good customers, okay customers, and not so good customers. And you want to make sure that you're trying to excite the not so good customers or customers that aren't committed to you. And of course, keep the customers that are committed to you in a much more engaged way. So we're looking at those dimensions in terms of really make sure that equity towards the platform is actually going ahead or moving ahead. So what we've learned in the customer equity project is that looking at tests and looking at behavior of the user over multiple months to a year is what's required. Of course, we're not a high frequency e-commerce company where people come to us 5 times a week. People do travel, but not as much as they would probably go to an e-commerce site. So we really need to make sure that we're getting a lot more signals, even when people don't travel, right? And when people do travel. So we're collecting all of those signals to really figure out, what's that equity? Is it just engagement? Is it contribution to content? Is it an actual transaction? Or are they canceling because they're unhappy? Or was the CS call volume, much more than the threshold that we expect? Or were the self-serve tools that we have, for example, we have a chat that you can actually directly converse with. It's topic detection chat that talks to you, and you can also talk to the property as well directly. And we look at that as very, very closely. And the last thing is we're very, very global. So we have, insane amount of languages that we support, including customer service. So that's another learning. And we've learned that to be quite interesting because the way consumers think about self-service in non-English languages is very different than how we're probably perceived in the US.
Say more there. Maybe people in the audience don't understand some of the implications of localization and having to run a global platform.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important thing is it starts with just the detail page and search, right? Almost everything. At least we're all used to just looking at English-based. Search results, English-based, detail pages, and you realize that the intent of the user in different languages is very, very different and very unique compared to just one primary language. This problem would have been the same if it was just a French company and then we're trying to accommodate other languages. So it's not necessarily exclusive to us. But when you start doing something like an autocomplete and you do it in a very different language that we don't have enough history and enough feedback loops on that, we may not give you the right result, right? And the self-serve tools may have very different consequences about what consumers expect. So it's an amazing and fascinating world. The moment you have such an explosion of languages, and we support 200 countries in terms of where we do business, so which makes it also very interesting.
So you've been offering homes for rent on these vacations since the early 2000s. You've partnered with a variety of partners, including Priceline and others, to offer packages and other sorts of special features. What are some of the offerings that you've released that are based on customer demand? Learning from your users and understanding what do they need, what do they want, and how you continually provide what is important to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Our home business is really a reflection of customer demand, and it grew organically over time. We've been in the home business for a very, very long time, like you said, from the early 2000s. But we've also grown that business very rapidly based on what customers are telling us, including the types of properties, including the capabilities that are required by the host, including the convenience of connecting that to the other parts of the business. So that's been fascinating. What we also learned is in terms of activities and tours and experiences that customers want. And it's pretty interesting that almost all of our customers do want the most popular activities in a destination, but they want more, obviously. But they definitely do want to go to the Alcatraz here, or go visit the Golden Gate, or the zoo or whatnot. But that's one thing that we learned, that we should not make a choice for the customer. Let the customers make sure that they don't want it. Let's make sure that we always have a selection that is bookable, available. And that's been a really amazing lesson for us, that let's be very broad and inclusive of consumer needs. And consumers will tell us over time where is their interest from their side, or what matters to them depending on who they are.
So there's explicit but implicit preferences.
Yes.
So what techniques do you use to extract implicit preferences?
Yeah, so variety of techniques. So one of the things that we've been very fortunate is to start looking at amazing set of customer service data, reviews, and our query volume that comes in through search.
Are you using NLP? Are you?
Yeah, so NLP is bread and butter of what we do. Like I said, we also use Markov chains very, very diligently. We're now moving from supervised learning to unsupervised learning. NLP is the heart of what we do. In fact, if you look at our reviews, we have obviously millions of reviews, but we're also deriving a lot of value in terms of you being able to make a decision. Because reviews are interesting, but they're not interesting unless we talk to you about who you are, right? So if it's a family that's looking for a pool in the property, unless we tell you the pool is good, you probably will not care that we have 10,000 reviews of 5-star. That's sort of meaningless to you. So we're really trying to make sure that we have a sense of decision making that makes it easier for the customers. So that we're constantly thinking about, hey, how do we reduce their friction? Everything about travel is always also a little bit more scary, because when you're going to a new country the first time, you don't know if your card's going to work, your phone's going to work, who will pick you up, what time of the day are you going to get there? So that's the part where we think that we can have a big role to play and sort of bring that responsibility in.
Excellent, thank you. So we have time for one question. If anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, please feel free. It can also be about travel. But I can't quite see, but I know we have a microphone out there, so I'm not sure. Is anyone raising their hand? I always have more questions for you, so don't worry.
We completely wowed the audience. They're speechless.
Okay, well, good. I have one more question. I'm very curious about some of the insights that you've learned over the course of the last few years in your role. What surprised you? What was a customer insight that possibly you didn't expect and that you've hopefully in some way incorporated into experiences?
Yeah, I think I've been obviously in the non-travel world for a very, very long time. And I learned a lot about e-commerce and e-commerce funnels, particularly a lot around discovery and recommendations and search, and things like reviews and whatnot. But I basically, my whole world was built around substitution and abundant inventory. Right, and I came to travel and I realized that
you were at Amazon, right?
Yeah, exactly, Amazon and Flipkart, right? And I was like, okay, we'll always figure out, we'll buy more, we'll open more warehouses, we'll have more availability, we'll ship things faster or whatever. But then I realized the moment you come to travel, you have none of those choices because there's probably only one museum that is called that. There's only one Metropolitan Museum. There's only one Rijksmuseum. So you can't really substitute it. So you have to work with the availability of it. You have to figure out how you work with those providers so that they can come in through your platform in a very systematic way that customers can understand. So that has been my biggest insight. So I spent a lot of time over the last few years or at least the last couple of years, to really think about how do we bring partners along this journey. So the travel partners are, no, I don't mean the hotel properties that are actually in a good place, but the experience providers are still very emerging in terms of technology.
Absolutely, and inconsistent.
And yeah, exactly. So we're trying to help them and really make sure that we bring them along the journey. So as they come along the journey, they can also render great customer experience, and which is good for them and good for us. So that's been a big surprise for me.
Wonderful. Well, such a joy to talk to you, especially about travel. In the summertime, it's hard not to think about travel.
Yes.
So I'll definitely check out your offering and book another trip on Booking.com.
Yeah.
And really look forward to seeing what else you do with the experiments that you've been running. So
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ram and Rachel. And I guess we all know it's time for lunch, which is being served in the Continental Ballroom. Please be here by 1:30 if you can. We have some really good speakers from the likes of Intel, Facebook, and Amazon. So you don't want to miss the conversations. See you in a bit.